Good afternoon. This is Mike Morris, Superintendent of Schools here in Amherst, and I want to thank everyone for coming in and tuning in to this second episode of Counselor's Corner. And today's focus is parenting during times of uncertainty, and certainly that promotes a lot of anxiety for families and for students, for all of us actually, and educators as well. And today we're joined by Karen Peters and Sherry Balzano, from the high school. And similar to the format we had last time, both Karen and Sherry are going to share some thoughts, some experiences they have, and offer some tips. And the second half will open it up for questions and comments. So if you are turning in, you can see on the right side, you should be able to put comments and questions in. And especially that second half, we'll be able to show those on the screen, and you'll be able to get some feedback from our experts here from the counseling world. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you very much for Karen and Sherry for taking time of your busy day on a Friday afternoon. We appreciate it. And I'm going to transition and start with Sherry, who's going to share some of her experiences, and we'll get Karen on in a minute.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Balzano. I'm a school counselor at the high school, and I'm going to be really honest. When Karen and I talked about doing this, and we talked about parenting during anxious times, I was like, oh, I'm not so sure I'm the right person. I have a soon-to-be 12-year-old in 2 weeks and a 17-year-old, so a junior in high school. So I am living this literally the same as you are. I want to start by saying that everyone is doing a great job. No matter how it is going, whatever you are doing, I am sure you are doing a great job. Karen and I are here to support you. We're here to brainstorm with you, and we're just going to offer you a little bit of background, maybe some fine tuning on what things are going and how we'll move on from there. So our focus of today is we're going to talk about well-being, connection, redefining our expectations. We want to make sure that everyone is doing okay. We want to really sort of reflect on how things are going and what we could change or what things are going well, and share those with each other. Karen's going to present to you the 4 S's, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about a 5th S that we've added in. And then after that, we'll give you some time for questions and answers. And hopefully we can all share some of what's working really well and some of what maybe can help each other work a little bit better as we face this challenge of this really uncertain time. I'm going to turn it over to Karen now to introduce herself and talk about the 4 S's.
Sure. Thanks, Sherry. I am really happy to be with everyone today. As Sherry said, I'm Karen Peters. I am one of the social workers at the high school, and I run the Bright Transition program. As we thought about what we wanted to share with all of you today, we put together some of the common questions that we've been getting from parents that we've been working with, and feelings that we've had ourselves as parents. And some of those questions are things like, if I'm feeling anxious as a parent, is this contagious? How am I transmitting this anxiety into my house? What do I do? A lot of parents are talking about feeling guilty or worried that they're not doing enough, they're not present enough because they're balancing their own job or other children or other demands that they have. How do I get unstuck from that? Some families are saying, I think my kids are doing okay, and should I be worried? What should I be feeling if I think my students are doing okay? And then, of course, I think everyone is talking about how do we continue to manage these long days, even with structure, even with schedules. How do we keep this up? So those are the questions that sort of are guiding what we thought we wanted to share with you all today. And when I'm stuck, when I feel overwhelmed, and when I'm not sure what to do, I look for and I go to the people that have grounded me and anchored me professionally or personally. And professionally, that one of those people has been Dr. Dan Siegel, who is a clinical psychiatrist out of UCLA and has written tons of parenting books and books on interpersonal neurobiology. I strongly recommend his work. And I wanted to share some of the, I think, a foundation piece of work that he's done that has guided me as a parent and that I've shared with parents over the years in my practice. And so these are 4 S's. And what Dr. Siegel talks about is these 4 S's are great in parenting, they're great in relationships, and they're great to work on with our relationship with ourselves. And I imagine, as Sherry said, that most of you are doing these things already. And I find that in these anxious, uncertain times, it's really helpful to take some time, take a few minutes and reflect on those things and maybe organize them a little bit better for myself as I continue to do my work of parenting and supporting families. So I'm going to run through these 4 S's. I'm going to highlight some of the things that I feel like are essential and important. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Sherry to share some other things. So the first S, why don't I share what the 4 S's are first so you know what's coming. So safety, feeling soothed, secure, and seen. So the first one is safety, and we know that this is important always, and particularly in times of distress, kids need our help feeling safe psychologically. This helps turn their reactive brains back to a receptive brain that can be flexible, that can take in information, and that can do some good reasoning. So one of the ways to help promote safety in our children when they're in distress is coming to them with gentle, loving responses when there are behaviors present. I don't know about you, but this is hard for me. And this is hard for lots of reasons for parents. It can be hard because the behaviors activate something in us. Perhaps that's connected to the way we were parented or things just in our makeup that push our buttons. So doing that gentle, loving responses is difficult, and it's something that can help promote safety. Sitting with them, actually getting down on their level, sitting next to them, being close to them, empathizing, validating. And if you tuned in last week, I know that the counselors talked a lot about these concepts, which are so critical to supporting safety in our children. And this is not agreeing, right? This is not saying, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. You don't have to do any of those things. This means that your feelings are valid, they're true for you, and I hear you. When I'm struggling to do those gentle, loving responses or empathize and validate, one of the things, and I'm sort of moved towards maybe being rigid or barking a bunch of orders, one of the things that I like to do is just this idea of sportscasting or just narrating what I'm seeing. So this might look like, oh, you really don't want to put your toys away and brush your teeth and get ready for bed. You're really having a good time. And what that does is that's connecting us. That's helping to integrate their experiences with my experiences. And it's giving me a little bit of time to slow myself down. The last piece about safety is leave the teaching for later, right? We know that when we're activated and when our brains are reactive, we're not open to hearing directions or hearing why what we did is not okay or why we should do something different, right? So leave the teaching for later and really focus on the feelings. We all yell and make mistakes, right? We all say and do things we wish we didn't. And so actually the last piece of this is own and apologize if you react in a way that doesn't feel right, doesn't feel good to you. This really helps maintain connection, which is what it's all about. When we're able to do this with our children, when we're able to say, oh, I yelled, I wish I didn't yell, I was really upset by what happened, and what we're maintaining that connection and we're helping to build resiliency. Okay. All right, so that was safety. So the next S is soothed, right? And we know that being soothed is one of the things we need to help slow our heart rate down and regulate our nervous system again so that we can get back online with our thinking brain so that our emotional or sort of our fight, flight, freeze brain is not in control. One of the things I learned from Dr. Siegel is this idea, he uses this hand model to teach children and parents and anybody about what's going on in the brain. Actually, it's like this. So with really young kids, I might put a little puppet inside and talk about their little brain, and then this is their big brain. But the idea here, this is our brainstem. this part up here, our cortex, our thinking brain, where we can engage in good reasoning, and we're being thoughtful, we're flexible. And there are times when we are so reactive that we flip our lid and we're not doing those things. And then this part of our brain, the limbic system and the brainstem that control those survival instincts, that fight, flight, freeze, and our emotions are in charge. This is when we're reacting big, and we're not engaged with that part of our brain. And we can become more aware of our triggers and our buttons, and not flip our lid as much and ask for help when those things come up. So I find this tool to be really useful. I have some students that will sometimes just come down and be like, I'm here. And with really little kids, like I said, we talk about the little brain and the big brain, and may use some puppets. But Dr. Siegel has some great videos online if you're interested in learning more about that. So soothing, being aware of that reactivity, so that we can get back to a receptive state. Some things for children that can be helpful: gentle touch, hugging. Doesn't work for everybody, but for some, that's enough to sort of start that slowing down of their nervous system. Being aware of our energy is really important as we're trying to soothe another person. So a simple, typical example might be your kid falls down, right? You fell, oh my gosh, right? So what happens? They escalate more, they may cry more. When we can come at it with a curious sort of more balanced approach. Oh my goodness, look, you fell, right? Let me see what's going on. Our kids are feeling that energy, and we're right there with them. When we need help sort of getting our energy re-regulated and sort of in a place where we can share and we can help soothe, again, we're helping kids get into that receptive state. This is not easy to do. In addition to being aware of when we're flipping our lid, when we notice those things, there's some practical things we can do in those moments. Like I talked about sports casting to help slow the time down. Breathing. I can't state enough the power of breathing before we react. And for a lot of people, the important thing here is the shift of ratio. So that may be in for 4 breaths, hold for 7, out for 4. So I'm just going to practice that right now. So in for 4, and I'm going to hold for 7, and out for 4. And again, that's slowing down my heart rate, that's increasing oxygen flow to my brain, that's getting me back online here so that I can make better decisions. And how long did that take us? Another thing, this is very simple, and my daughter actually does this sometimes because I do it so often, is just hand on heart, hand on abdomen. And there's something about this that research has shown that 98% of people find comfort in doing this. I'm not really sure why. So I might switch and then figure out which one is more comfortable for you. But this is something you can do as you notice your buttons are getting pushed, or that you're feeling worried or anxious before you speak, before you engage, before you interact. Trying that for a minute. This also helps us, and I'd say the last part of soothing is tending to the heart before we focus on consequences, right? Whatever happened is valid for them. Tending to the heart helps keep that connection and keep us regulated before we're asking them to see our perspectives. Okay, so we've done safety and soothing halfway through. Okay, so the next one is seen. This is the idea of feeling felt, right? In school, we talk a lot about PBIS, so positive behavior support, catching kids doing something good. When I think about feeling felt, and when I think about seen, I think about acknowledging kids for doing something positive or good for no reason, telling them something specific that you like about them, being curious about their interests, acknowledging their effort or their struggle, appreciating their progress in something and showing them some gratitude. So this might be as simple as, I love having you as a daughter. I love being your mom. I notice these interesting things you're building with your Legos. Can you tell me about it? Why did you choose this? I'm curious. Over the past 2 months, I can't tell you how many mud soups I have tasted over time, because that's what my daughter is into right now. And so taking a few minutes to really share that and see that and ask about it increases our connection. Reflecting on something that you enjoyed, even if it is very small, there's a lot of power in that for kids. Yesterday, I really enjoyed sitting with you while we both read a book together. It was really fun for me. Or I loved playing cards with you. Or thank you so much for helping me set the table yesterday. So those are some ways that we can help our kids feel seen. Okay, and the last one is secure. And Dr. Siegel talks about that these first 3 S's really help strengthen the concept of secure attachment. And it also helps us provide a roadmap for when we do good enough, right? We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for presence. We're doing the best we can with what we've got. And we know that there are going to be ruptures. We know that we're going to struggle. We know we're going to have opportunities to repair with our kids. That's the beauty of relationships. And I think that every repair we make helps that strengthen. So secure, so some things to sort of boost the security is being present for things that matter. Again, the taste testing of the mud soup, being present when for the 10th time in one afternoon, I might want to do something else. That really helps in those moments. These days are looking very different from us than regular days. We're not going to sporting events. We're not going to school events. We're not doing other things. So finding ways to be present in things that matter for our kids. Connecting with them in non-distracted ways. Again, right now, and Sherry's going to talk more about this in a few minutes, this is really hard. Our lives are becoming virtual. We're connected in ways that that we're plugged in a lot of times. So finding a few minutes every day to be unplugged together really increases this concept of repairing in times that have been tough. And being confident enough that saying that you've made a mistake or that you're unsure about something can really help strengthen your relationship. Creating rituals, and Sherry's going to talk a little bit more about that. So these 4 S's, I feel like have such an important place as we're navigating our way through these anxious, uncertain times when we don't have answers as to when we're going to be back together in school or with our families, or when it's going to be safe enough to do things that we used to do. When we don't have these answers, these are some tools that hopefully can help you maintain that connection and respond to things that might be popping up in your children and in yourself. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Sherry.
Hey, that was awesome. So I'm going to talk about what Karen and I are calling the 5th S. And that's structure. And I'm actually going to start by telling you an anecdote of my own house. So when we came home on March 13th and we thought we were going to be out for 2 weeks, I'm a person who lives by a calendar. I'm very time management. My daughter, who's going to be 12 very shortly, is very much like me. And I made 2 very clear daily schedules for both of my children. By Tuesday of the first week, my daughter was living by the schedule. 8 o'clock, going to do reading, 9 o'clock, go outside. It worked. By about noon on Tuesday, my 17-year-old was like, "This does not work for me, Mom. It's not working. I can't do this. Please don't make me ever follow your crazy schedule again." So that sort of paused me. It kind of made me stop, because I thought, wow, everybody needs structure. And then I realized that the structure he needed was not exactly the structure that I thought he needed or that I needed. So our 5th S is structure. And I think that the key part about what we're going to say about structure is it needs to be flexible. And what the structure, even within your own house, it may need to be a little different for every person. And that's okay. It's really important that you stop and have those conversations. So we've all heard the phrase, we're all living through the same storm, but we're all in different boats. And I think that's true for every family and every house, and somewhat very much also true for every person within that family and house. Um, there's a great article that has really guided, I'm sure many of you have seen it, maybe not, I'll talk about it, that has guided a lot of counselors who are doing distance learning counseling. And it's called the Your Job is to Arrive article. And in the article, a man who travels regularly for work and will get on an airplane and work on his laptop for hours was traveling home with his family and a young infant child. And was a rough plane ride. If anybody's traveled with a young child, they know what those can be like. And he walked into work the next day and said to a colleague, "I'm really sorry I didn't get anything done on the plane ride home." And the colleague said to him, "You're a parent of a young child. Right now, your job is to arrive. That's your goal. Your end goal is to arrive." And you arrived. You arrived safely. You all arrived in one piece, and it's okay. And the article related to the pandemic, and it said that all of us, youth, children, teachers, parents, guardians, anybody, every citizen, our goal is to arrive at the end of this pandemic however we can. And it's not to be perfect. It's not to do every Pinterest craft that we all think we're going to do. It's not to, if we can do those, great, but it's okay. Our job is to arrive. I have a very good friend who has 5 children under the age of 9. She is always has been, in my opinion, a super mom. She's amazing. And about 3 weeks ago, she just called me and said, my daughter handed in a paper that had a coffee stain on it, and she took a picture of it, and I was so embarrassed. And I said, we have to be willing to realize that right now good enough is enough, and we have to, it's really hard, especially for parents, to accept sometimes that good enough is enough. um, and I've had to stop myself several times as a parent with my own children and be like, this is good enough. Good enough is the best right now." And that's what we're living through. I think one suggestion that we have for you is, and Karen alluded to it a little bit, if you had asked people 10 weeks ago, we were living on screens 10 weeks ago, and we thought screen time was huge and it was being overused and there was way too much screen time. And I think if you ask somebody now, we'd be like happy with the screen time that we were using 10 weeks ago, because literally life is happening via screen. School is happening via screen. Work is happening via screen. Sometimes parents who are trying to work are putting a 2-year-old to watch a movie. Screen time is huge right now. So we really feel like it's important for just a very short time every day, whether it be as a family or individually, unplug for at least 10 minutes a day, connect, check in, and be willing to be vulnerable with your children. I found that we had a huge breakthrough in my house when, about a week into it, my husband and I said, "Oh my God, this is so hard. We're losing it." And my teenage son was like, "What?" And we were like, "Yeah, this is really hard. It's the hardest thing we've ever done. We can't manage this. This feels really hard." And he was like, "Wow, you guys were making dinner and doing laundry and making mom's crazy schedules and all of those things." And he said, "I didn't realize this was hard for you. I thought it was only hard for me." So I think sometimes allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and I'm not saying put your problems on your children, that is certainly not where we would recommend at all. But to say to them, "This is hard," or "I'm having a hard time," or "I could use some help with this. Can someone help me?" Um, Sometimes allows them to feel a little more open and be able to verbalize their own feelings a little more than they have been able to in the past. Um, we also suggest that you find ways to let them help, whether that be, they're helping to cook dinner, or they're helping to load the dishwasher or set the table, or they're doing something simple as, this was a neighbor and it was fabulous. About 4 days ago, this paper airplane came flying in our yard. And I was like, "What is that?" And the neighbor confessed to me that she had to do work and just gave her daughter a task and told her daughter to make paper airplanes and send them in all the neighbors' yards to let them know they were thinking of us. And it was a very simple, easy way for her to feel like she helped. And when we all stood there and received the paper airplanes, she just was like, "I made a difference." And she's a little bit. And it was really exciting. So children need to feel like they're helpful and they have a place, especially teenagers. Teenagers can help with 6th grade math that I'm not doing so well with. Teenagers can help with lots of those things, but it's important to be vulnerable. It's important to let them know. And it's important that we all arrive and just arrive at the end of this. And I have lots more that I could say, but we really want to allow time for questions. So I'm going to turn it back to that. And at that point, we'll let Mike take over.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the great advice and the tips that I know many families are looking for strategies in this time. So, for those of you who are on the live stream, you certainly can type in questions. A couple parents had emailed me questions, parents, guardians had emailed me questions beforehand because they weren't able to make it. So I think maybe I'll start with one of those, and that may engender people. So this one said, my child continues to express worry about their health and the health of our family. What can I do to help them with that concern?
Mm-hmm.
Karen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I feel like I've heard this a lot from parents. And what I would say, going back to the 4 S's, is I would be curious and present, asking them questions about maybe where that's coming from, and validate those concerns that kids have. You're really worried about whoever in the family, you're really worried about these things. Tell me more about that. And I think being honest about, we don't have answers as to things like vaccines or things like when, like I said, we're going to be able to be together with those people. But sitting with that uncertainty is really a powerful way to help maintain presence and help kids understand that you're listening. So I think a lot of these questions aren't going to have answers. And the important thing is that you're asking more about what that's like for them. Tell me more about your worries. I want to hear that. I want to understand that a little bit more. Sitting with them, taking that time to be present and not brushing it off. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to figure it out. Saying things like, I had a parent the other day talking about this because someone in their family is ill, and she felt like she didn't want to burden the kid. Don't worry about it. We'll handle it. And then realize, you know what? You were really worried about that. I need to sit with you and talk through those worries. And she went back, did that repair, and I think feels like the kid is much more comfortable asking more questions. They also, I think depending on the ages, this was an upper elementary age kid. They did some research, some sort of age appropriate research to get some questions answered. And those kind of things were really helpful for the child.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback off of Karen, the other thing that I think is really important for them to hear, and I had a similar situation with a student, a mother who was asking me about her younger child. One thing that's really important for them to hear is, I don't have all the answers, but we're in this together, and I'm going to do my best to ensure your safety, and we'll work together to try to figure that out. I think that they need to hear that I'm there for you.
Right. Thank you. Another question that came in to me by email was, my child's very concerned about, actually multiple ones of these, but some version of it is about being ready for the next grade level. Some at the K-8 level, it's often framed as a next grade level. At the high school level, the ones that I've gotten have been very much about thinking how it's going to affect their postgraduate plans. And I know, Sherry's smiling because I think she's living that right now, from what I understand. So just thinking about the anxiety that students are having because they're thinking forward to fall and then maybe beyond, and how to manage that.
So one thing I've been reassuring my high school students and my high school student that I'm living with, who will be as a rising senior, is that this is an uncertain time. And in terms of postgraduate plans, colleges, this is uncertain for them too, and they are working as hard as we are to ensure that students will be on track and with whatever they need. In terms of being ready for the next year, and I've heard this from high schoolers and from elementary school parents, what I say is that we're all aware of it. There's going to have to be backtracking. This is not going to be we're going to start September and start multiplication in 3rd grade, because we still need to finish a little bit of, what was missed. And teachers know that. And I so trust the educators in our district and in the world. what a great time is Teacher Appreciation Week. So I'm so glad I could say that. I so trust the educators that when we go back to school, however that looks, their first priority is going to be, how are you? And are you okay? And their next priority is going to be, okay, where are you at? And what do we need to do to try to recover from whatever gaps were lost? I have reassured every student that I've talked to at the high school that the teachers are aware. There is going to be no preconceived notion that they're ready to start calculus without having finished pre-calculus, and that it's something we're all working on. And that's a hard thing to explain to them. But I do think that reassurance of, you're right, it's scary, and it's scary for the teachers too, but we're all in this. It's on our mind, and we're going to make sure it's happening for you.
So I saw a couple other questions come in. Here's one. How do I help my children with the trauma and loss and worry that they don't necessarily express? Or do I just wait till it comes up?
Yeah, I want me to try that.
Sure.
Okay. So this is such a great question. And I think that as adults, we are often keyed into what we think we're worried about, what we might be worried about later, right? Or we think our kids are going to have these reactions. I think what I've said to families is finding non-stressful times to bring up some of these topics and to say things like, you know what, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to talk about. This is a really uncertain, confusing time. And I know that a lot of kids your age are feeling sad or scared or worried. And sometimes that means they might stay in their room all day, or sometimes that might mean they think that everything's cool. I'm wondering if you've had any of those experiences, or if you've had any of those feelings. So I would be curious about this with them. And I would try to bring this up at a time that is not stressful, just to engage a conversation. And one of the ways I like to do that, as I was just saying, is saying to kids, a lot of people have these type of symptoms. I wonder if any of those things are true for you. Can you tell me about what this is like for you? So getting their perspective before we sort of decide what we think it might be. And I think this is a little bit related to the question that we got from a lot of parents about, my kid's doing okay. Should I be worried? Are they having this traumatic response that they're not sharing with me? So into that, I would say we are in a passage, right? We are in the middle of this. We don't know the end point. We don't know what's going to happen. So all we've got is the good data we know as parents as to what our kid typically does. And we also know the things that happen for them in times of distress. So we're going to use that knowledge, and we're going to lean on our relationships using those 4 S's and other tools to sort of continue to ask our kids questions and have those conversations with them.
Can I just add one piece?
Yeah,
that I wish I had said before and I forgot. I apologize. We know studies have shown that, especially from about the age of 10 up, pre-adolescence to adolescence, that sometimes looking people in the eye and talking to them is really hard, right? So we've all heard the old adage of take a car ride and have them sit next to you, because if they don't have to look at you, it's easier sometimes to express their feelings. And I actually have suggested to a few parents, instead of a car talk, I've suggested right now what I call a walk talk. Because if you're walking next to each other and you're focusing on walking, and they still don't have to make that direct eye contact. I know eye contact is really important and it's really great, but for adolescents 10 to 18, that's really hard to do sometimes. So sometimes that walk, I found with my 2 children, when I see either of them getting really stressed during this time, I'll be like, I'm going to go for a walk. You want to come with me? And they say no. And I sort of coerce them. And by the end of the walk, we've gotten to some of the heart of what's going on. So I love what Karen said, and I love the questions, but especially if you're working with that age group, think about that car talk, walk talk model if they're not looking at you directly in the eye when you're sitting on their bed trying to have that conversation.
That's the West Wing, right? That's
the car talk.
West Wing and the walk and talks. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. The next question we have, and I know this is one that I'm hearing from many families, and I know you addressed it a bit in the earlier segment, but I think it's worth maybe looking in more acutely. Having 4 children sit in front of computers all day, is seriously disheartening. And I would include that many of us as adults who are also sitting in front of computers along with their children, knowing that they're grieving the losses, worrying about being on track. So any thoughts you have in terms of supporting families with that very real concern?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is disheartening. It's hard. And I think validating that it's disheartening, I agree with you, Lynn. I I always try to wish my students happy birthday, and I've had to do it by email, and I feel like I'm missing out, like, by giving them that actual in person. So it is disheartening. I understand, and they are grieving losses, and I think that um, right now those are all real feelings, and they are allowed to have them. We need to validate them, as Karen said. But I think reassurance is as important, of especially about the being on track, because I know I'm hearing that every day from the high schoolers. I'm so worried I'm going to be behind next year. The reassurance, as hard as it is for them to hear, and just continually reassuring, because at some point that continual reassurance will be like, oh, okay, they've said this every day, and my teachers are saying it, and my guidance counselor is saying it, and my parents are saying it. At some point that reassurance will start, but it is a loss, and I think they are grieving, and I think we're all grieving the loss. It's hard to say. There's really no answer for that.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, if I was going to jump in, I just think in terms of the computer piece too, just trying to find ways that are scheduled breaks to be outside.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's supposedly going to snow tonight, and we live in New England and it's May, and but at some point, and we had a lot of this last weekend and some days this week, like this morning and today, just making sure that as a family you can get outside, and whatever that activity looks like, it could be taking a walk, it could be playing a game. I think it's really important. It's when you're inside and the screens are everywhere, even if you're saying, okay, we're going to take a screen break, at least in my family, it's hard to actually do that for me, as well as my kids and other family members who live with us, who are with us. So, I do think having routines around that, it's just a little easier to enforce a no screen. I find it's easier to actually implement a no screens piece when we're outside versus in the house, but saying there's not screens. It just, for my family anyway, that just say that works much better.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I would just say, for I'm a school therapist, but I want to say that you as parents trust yourself to know best, that we support you as the school folks. We want you to we want the kids to be engaged in work. We want them to participate in the Google Meets if that is meaningful for them, but trust your gut as a parent. If it's too much on one given day, we support you in that, because your health and well-being as a family and how you navigate these things over time is much more important than that one day getting that piece done. And if you're struggling with that, reach out to the counselor for your school or your teacher, and I guarantee you're going to be met with a very warm, curious response about how to make this work for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can take some of this one. Highlight the idea of structure. For example, if English class met every day at Zoom at 10 a.m., it'd be something to plan around. Has this been considered? So I think in a week ago's newsletter, I wrote a bit about this, that I think it's actually a microcosm of a larger phenomenon, which is there's been no point in my 19 years as an educator where families wanted such disparate things from schools as there is right now. So we have families who absolutely are interested in more synchronous learning, and then we have families who are having every age group who are struggling to get their children onto synchronous learning. The recommendation from the state was to use synchronous learning, like Google Meets, generally for class meetings, small group. At the elementary level, the last 2 weeks in our newsletter, we've included a daily planner to go along with what goes home to try to help families develop some structure, because we heard from a lot of families, particularly at the elementary level, that having a weekly set of activities and choices wasn't enough to provide that structure. So, it is an editable document, so families can put more math in or more literacy, but it's a way to have some structure, along with what comes home. But I think it is a challenge around structure. And then if we have days like where it's 75 degrees, you're going to maybe adjust that structure depending on the age of your kids, because you're going to go outside and hopefully, do all the things that we just spoke about for the last question. So, certainly you can take a look at the last newsletter for more information about, synchronous versus asynchronous, and also to see some ways that we're trying to provide structure for students and families to make it easier for everybody. I think this one had an answer, but I'm just going to put it up, which is about curriculum expectations. I think you did speak about that, and I just want to put up the response that Ms. Westmoreland did, which is that if families do need tech support for their student's device, they can submit a request by filling out that form. You can also be in touch with the principal of your school who can help you with that if that form or getting on that. If the connectivity problems aren't letting you get on that form, get in touch with the principal. And we've had many examples where the principal has been able to connect a family with our IS department to try to help with that. We do also still have a hotspot program. We've given out dozens of hotspots, but if there are connectivity issues to the point where people need a mobile hotspot, we certainly have more, and we were more than happy to provide them. We want families not to have this as an extra burden for them to getting online in this environment. Okay, here we go. My high school kids are anxious about getting credits and dealing with the volume of work which they are doing. What can I tell them besides it's going to be fine?
So I would say this goes back to that validating and being seen. I think that we want as parents more than anything else to make everything okay for our kids, for ourselves, for our family, and for our world right now. And we can't do it. We can't do it all by ourselves. And so what I would really encourage you to do, as hard as this is sometimes, is to resist the urge to say it's all going to be fine in that moment and say, this is really hard for you. You're having a really tough time right now. I want to tell me more about it. We're going to do it. It's going to be fine. But before you do that reassurance and before you say that, let them sit with you and express that, because you're going to learn a little bit more about how their system processes being anxious, which is going to be a lifelong relationship that they have, that we want to help build their tools for, so that they don't flip their lid every time something comes their way that feels overwhelming. So take a minute, get present, get grounded if you need to, and be curious about those things.
I would also add, as a school counselor, and I'm sorry, Karen, because I see a couple of questions sort of similar like it in the queue. If the workload is really feeling too much,
good point.
Please have your child or you as a parent reach out to the teacher and or the counselor, because Mike has reassured us numerous times. The DOE has said it. I, as a parent, just reached out to my own child's teacher and said, I don't think he's supposed to be spending 12 hours on this one assignment. Am I correct? And the teacher was like, no, it should have been done in 45 minutes. Let's figure out how we can make that happen for him. So I think that the other thing is, in a way for your children to feel heard, is to say, let's send an email together. This sounds like it's a little bit more than we thought it was going to be. Let's see if we can talk to the teacher and the guidance counselor and come up with a plan. The teachers are being incredibly flexible. They want to be flexible. They do not want your children sitting in an assignment for 12 hours. So if the volume of work is feeling that heavy, please, please, please reach out to us.
Yeah, I think that the next one's on a similar, it's not the same, but on a similar theme, which is, I'll just read it out loud. Having a hard time balancing our expectations that our teens participate in school with compassion about how incredibly hard it is to stay engaged when you're in your bedroom with a Chromebook.
Yeah.
I think
it's hard.
Exactly right. And I think
it is hard.
There's no right balance, right? So if anyone says they've got the balance right, I'm going to really have a lot of questions for them, and they can take that on the road, because lots of people will be curious about that. I think the thing I want to say around multiple of the questions around this theme are that we're actively starting, and actually staff got an email about this earlier today, to be thinking about fall and what that looks like, both in an academic and a social emotional way. The one thing I can guarantee before we even do the work of what it specifically looks like, it's not going to look like a typical fall. And I'm not talking about the physical distancing components and all those in kind of public health pieces. Purely from an academic and social emotional perspective, we're going to be aware that students won't have been in school for 5.5 months, and adults won't have been in school for 5.5 months. And it's going to mean that we're not going to start math on day one, lesson one, like we typically did, and we're going to have to rebuild our community. For me, I always try to think of challenges as adaptive. So not just the technical parts of where do we start, but what do we learn during this time about ourselves, about our school, about our community, and how do we use it as an opportunity to be more inclusive and kind of find some strengths that maybe we didn't even know we had. because they were sort of, sometimes when you're in the habit of doing the job you've done for a while, right? It can be eye-opening to everyone's job has changed in this world right now, and educators are no different. So please know that we'll be actively working and thinking. I think by the end of June, we'll have some guiding principles that we'll be sharing out with the larger community, both on the academic front, the social emotional front, as it relates to technology, because there was a number of questions about that, as well as some of the operations that we'll need to be thinking about for fall. And there'll be opportunities like this one to actually weigh in on guiding principles. So as we're developing plans in the summer for what fall looks like, every community member, every stakeholder would have an opportunity to weigh in, to give an opinion, because what we need to have is to make sure we're doing the public health pieces, of course, but also the public confidence that we're ready, both from a safety perspective, physical safety perspective, but also from an academic and an emotional safety perspective, to welcome all students back. So sometimes I think, the concerns very legitimately are, what's going to happen when my student gets to X grade level. X grade level is going to look different. All the research I'm seeing is predicting, no matter what schools have done, and some schools, and I'm very proud of the work we've done here, there's going to be a difference in what students are coming in with next fall, both, again, academically and emotionally. And in this district, our sensitive educators are going to think through both of those and come up with plans to make sure students feel welcomed and not stressed by their return. So if that helps some families who are feeling like that balance of trying to distance learning and then the compassion piece, if you had to err, I'd err on the side of compassion. And certainly as an educator, I want students engaged in work, but I think like our folks said before, our counselors, you know your children, and you're going to know where that line is, where you have to say, at this point, the most important thing is the most important thing, and that may not be getting this particular assignment done. And I think this is a unique time too, where educators aren't getting the same windows into students as we typically do, because even this format we're using now doesn't give the same window as having students in class in counselors' offices. And so, it's really, that gap is really challenging for the educator-student connection. So, trust your instincts as a parent, and, hopefully that's helpful feedback. But I want to make sure that no one thinks it's going to pretend this didn't happen, and September 2nd will roll along and everything's just going to be as it was last first day of school. That's not going to be the case this year. See, there's a question: will students get a final report card or other evaluations? So at the high school level, students are being assessed from a credit, no credit perspective, but not a report card or grades in a more typical way. At the K-8 level, this is actually something that I was talking about earlier today with some colleagues and with some teachers. We're trying to figure out a way that we can share feedback in a general context, but we don't want students doing work at any level. We're particularly focused on K-8 at the moment, to get a report card or get a grade, because that's not consistent with the state guidance, not consistent with what we think is appropriate in this context. It's really the continuation of learning that's our focus, and not the assessment and grade. When students come back, both academically and social emotionally, we're going to have to figure out how do we assess where they are, what their needs are, and how do we support them in that way. So we are still working out details about that, but in terms of grades that students would typically receive at the end of the school year, that I can say we're actively not going to do. I think there was one more question that got emailed to me. We might have time for one more, if that's okay, Sherry and Karen.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that my child does not look to be engaging with friends online and seems distant in ways that I have not seen before.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing that a lot, and someone emailed me that, and I just think it was just, if you could weigh in on that. I mean, it's sort of related in some ways to one of the questions towards the beginning.
Very
but
much so.
Yeah, but I'd love to hear your 2 cents and what advice you'd offer that family.
Karen, you want to go first?
Sure. So this is or non-typical times, right? And so for many students, this is not the preferred way of interacting. We miss so much of social cues and connection and all of these things that are not present for us on a daily basis, that we're used to getting that input from each other. And so I think that there's a lot of kids that I've talked to that are finding it exhausting to be FaceTiming or being online with their friends, because they either have to show up and perform that they're in a certain sort of place, and that brings them all sorts of feelings of, I don't feel very good. I don't want to do my hair. I don't want to get out, or I have to sort of perform in a way. So I think that as parents, again, the opportunities to be curious with our kids about their experiences with friends, ask about them, normal or validate that this is not typical. This is not how we as social beings or creatures are sort of wired to be interacting with each other, and that this makes a lot of sense that some people are really struggling with it. And I think then using your good knowledge about who your kid is and what kind of things might be meaningful for them might be the next way to start. So for example, one of my students we were just having this conversation earlier this morning. We talked about one thing that she used to like to do a long time ago was write letters to people, and that she hadn't done that in a very long time. That for her was a familiar thing that she felt like, oh, this might be fun. So it's not solving the problem. It's not addressing all of the things, but it's finding a reconnection with something that used to bring her some meaning. And I think you find those things out from your children by having these conversations with them. And I think the other thing I would say is enlist the support of other people who know your kids really well. So this could be cousins, aunts and uncles, or your school counselor, or their favorite teacher, and get their perspective. Because as parents, we know our kids in one particular way, or maybe lots of ways, but there are a lot of people in their lives that have a relationship with them that might shed some light on ways that you can support them with connecting. Yeah.
And if I could just add one piece to that, that I talked through with a parent just earlier this week, gauge your child, because this particular parent said to me, my daughter is not really connecting with anybody. And I said, well, how does she seem? And she said, she actually seems okay. She's happy. We're going for walks. She's going outside. She's doing her thing. She said, but when I say to her, why aren't you really connecting with your friends? And she said, like Karen did, she said, it's just too much work right now. Like she said, I'm working so hard to do distance learning and adapt to this new environment that it's too much work. I know my friends are there when I need them, but right now I'm okay. And that's what I need to be. So I think that's an important piece too, is that sometimes we check in with them and see if they are okay with it, because some of them really may be that they're working so hard to learn this new normal that we're living, that they are trusting their old normal is still okay and putting their energy into the new one.
Well, I'll do one more question briefly. I know we're a little over time, but I think it's a good one that's certainly going to come up. So normal summers are a chance to get a break from school routine. We've already had plenty of break. Do you have suggestions for summer, especially as it sees like many activities won't happen? So my understanding in the next week or two is that we anticipate the governor making some announcement about summer activities and getting a sense of that. I think my own, I know we are planning, starting to plan at the elementary level, some, at least some resources and some things we could provide for families as options or opportunities. And I know at the high school we are as well. I've been in conversation with Principal Jones, who has some thoughts on that. I don't know if either of you had things that you'd want to add to that as well.
Oh, boy. Sherry, I'm looking at you because I'm going to ask you.
Well, so, and I guess from this one, I'm going to go out of being a counselor and into being a parent, because I have two children, one of whom is a competitive dancer and one of whom is a huge athlete. Both of them have grieved the loss of their spring seasons. And both are really apprehensive about what summer's going to be like. Is there going to be summer soccer? Is there going to be summer dance? Are those things going to be there for them? And we've actually just this week had a lot of conversations around those, in which we've committed to, well, maybe there won't be summer soccer where you won't play a game, but dad used to coach you and he's willing to go to the field with you once every 3 days and have that own creative summer soccer training. And yes, maybe you're not going to have dance in the studio, but we found these great online programs and we'll figure out something like that. So I wish, and hi, Deb, I wish I could see you. I wish I had better answers, but I think it may be that it's going to be creative again. And unfortunately, I feel like this is testing a lot of our parent creative juices. I'm sure everybody in the group is feeling that. And I think that you're right. But I also think it is time to take a break. And the one thing I would encourage, and I echo what Mike said, is once school is done on June 18th, let's try to even more lessen the screen time. Like really that break from the screen is going to be so important, because there's so many things that hopefully will be open that we can do safely, that I think it's just going to be creative. But I would say that would be my suggestion, and hopefully we'll get some really great ideas from the professionals, because I'm waiting for them.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Karen, go ahead.
I would just say one other thing. I think this is another great opportunity to enlist your kids in being a part of the solution.
Yeah.
And so I have a family that we were talking about this last week, and they've instituted these family meetings, which sound like a lot of fun and very chaotic. And, there's some pomp and circumstance that it's funny. But one of the things that they said was this was an agenda item, and that everybody in the family was going to sort of bring some ideas to the table around what we can do to make our summer really meaningful. So don't underestimate what your kids might come up with, because it might be things that, we as grownups might not.
Yeah, and I think just to close, I want to piggyback on something Sherry said, which is also trying to think of interest-based activities like you typically would in the summer.
Yeah.
And even if camps and some of those things might not happen, I guess I'm optimistic or hopeful that there may be some relaxing, and there may be an ability to have a little more in-person socialization than what we currently have. Obviously, that's up to the governor and the public health experts, but even if the recommendations aren't for large-scale camps and things that both Karen and Sherry talked about, things may open up a little bit, or open up enough where some of those constraints are relaxed. And even though the parent guardians may have to be a little more involved than they would normally be, as Sherry said about the soccer, maybe the soccer team doesn't practice, but maybe it's possible in the summer where groups of 3 or 6 kids or something can simulate something like that. And obviously we'll have to wait and see on that. But I think the interest piece for summer is important, because even if it doesn't look like, I agree with that point. Even if it doesn't look like students need a break, I think many students do need a break, and their parents need a break too. And sometimes therein lies the challenge from that. But I think thinking of fun, interest-based activities would be really important for students and families to be able to do together in the summer in a way that with distance learning and other things, it may be harder to pull off. And then we won't have snow forecasts. You get to summer. I know we have them in early mid-May, but that'll be done at that point. On that note, I really want to thank Sherry and Karen. Thank you so much for your presentation, preparation, and also answering the questions. Thanks to everyone, the viewers who weighed in, and we'll be emailing this out in next week's Friday update as well for people. The link that was sent a couple times is live, so people, if they want to go back and replay it or share that link with other people who couldn't make it, you don't have to know a special link. The same link will continue to work, and it'll still be housed on our ARPS YouTube network and channel. But thanks again, Sherry and Karen. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful week.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank
You too, everyone. Take care.